Well, we have an interesting hour ahead of us. Hopefully you'll sit around and hang out and listen. I have some very interesting things to discuss on the show. We are live. If you'd like to call in, you are certainly welcome to. Or if you would like to submit questions through the InQuick system on Achieve Radio's network, you are welcome to do so as well. Well, we have a new target. The United States has picked a new bin Laden. Edward Snowden, a former contractor for the National Security Agency, slipped out of the United States in late May last month, traveling to Hong Kong with computers full of secret documents in order to expose what he called horrifying U.S. government surveillance capabilities. He began in the shadows, leaking top secret files to The Guardian in the UK and The Washington Post, but just a few days after the first stories broke, he stepped into the media spotlight himself, confessing to being the paper's source and telling viewers a little bit about himself. Since then, little by little, the details of Snowden's life, the parts he left out, have emerged, providing a picture of a smart kid who dropped out of high school only to embark on his own patchwork college education on his way to working for one of the most shadowy espionage agencies in the world. That's a direct quote from ABC News' website. And then they continue to list in order his timeline, going from one thing to another, highlighting what seems to be, a kind of a manufactured, if you will, piecing of some kind of, troubled kid who, just couldn't quite finish college and kept hopping around from place to place, really just kind of putting him down as far as his intelligence goes. The reason I'm doing a show on this tonight is a few things. I recently finished up a book by Sybil Edmonds and found it absolutely fascinating last week, her story, which broke a few years after 9/11. And her book, The Classified Woman, came out in 2011. It was self-published. She put out her story, her memoir, and I read it through it rather quickly. It was a very fascinating story, and then, within a few days, this story broke. So it was kind of following this theme. So I thought this was important because I've received a lot of questions and emails from listeners, from people on Facebook and social media, wanting to know, what's going on here, what my take was it. So I figured really the best way to do this was to get some people here who can talk about this. And who better to do that than Wayne Madsen? He's a Washington, D.C. based investigative journalist, author, and syndicated columnist. He's written for multiple publications all over the country. He is an author of the Handbook of Personal Data Protection, an acclaimed reference book on international data protection law. Other books include co-authored America's Nightmare, The Presidency of George Bush II, also Jaded Tasks, Big Oil, Black Ops, and Brass Plates, as well as The Manufacturing of a President, the CIA's insertion of Barack Obama Jr. into the White House. He has been a major regular contributor on RT and Press TV, a frequent political and national security commentator on Fox News. He has also appeared on ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and MSNBC, and he's taken on big personalities such as Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity on their television shows, and he's been invited to testify as a witness before the U.S. House of Representatives, the UN Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and a terrorism investigation panel for the French government. He has some 20 years experience in security issues. He's a U.S. naval officer. He managed one of the first computer security system programs for the United States Navy, and he also worked for the National Security Agency itself and the Naval Data Automation Command at Department of State, RCA Corporation, and Computer Services Corporation. So he has a very long, vast background in this issue, and I'm very excited to talk to him and to just get his take on what's going on here, because I really feel very strongly that it's important for us to pay attention to these ideas. And, the other option is to stick our head in the sand like an ostrich and just pretend it's not happening, or go along with the flow of the mainstream media, which is definitely almost, another branch of the United States government itself. So welcome, Wayne. Thank you very much for joining me and my listeners.
Hi, good to be with you.
So where do we start when somebody looks at an issue like this, they watch it on the nightly news, how do you feel about Edward Snowden himself? What's your take on him?
Well, I believe he actually is a whistleblower. Having dealt with a number of whistleblowers, especially from NSA, I can say that, he certainly fits the bill. And I've dealt with whistleblowers from the CIA as well. So the only thing I find unusual is the fact that he tried to contact the mainstream media. I know other whistleblowers have tried to do that in the past, and they've gotten the short shrift, and apparently he did too, at least from the Washington Post. But nevertheless, we now know that the Post and the Guardian have in their possession information that they decided they didn't want to release because they consulted with the U.S. government. A long time ago, I stopped calling the U.S. government for their opinion because it's stonewalling. I don't negotiate with the U.S. government. I'm not surprised the Washington Post and the Guardian did. We saw the same thing happen, of course, with the WikiLeaks, the cable release of the State Department cables. Deals were done. Information was redacted. Information was taken out. I don't believe in that because having worked in the system, most classified information is classified merely to protect certain government officials from being embarrassed. It has nothing to do with national security. There are national secrets, absolutely. I've seen them. But when you look at the wide amount of information that's classified, the real secrets are probably 10% or less than of all the classified information out there. As we know from the WikiLeaks, the State Department cables, most of that information could have been found in any local newspaper or on any radio talk show, depending on what country we're talking about, or in any diplomatic cocktail reception. That's the source. The intelligence community likes to say that they're sensitive sources and methods. There's nothing sensitive about going to a cocktail party and gossiping, and there's it's no intelligence method to go pick up and have translated at the local tabloids at the local newspaper stand. So this is what is called classified information today, and what Mr. Snowden had was the extent to which the National Security Agency is routinely violating our privacy in the United States.
It was interesting that he chose Hong Kong, don't you think? Because it seemed like he very well planned this out in what he was going to do. Obviously, his steps were very well planned. And when he went to Hong Kong, now he's telling the government there in Hong Kong that he, has information based on some of the United States spying into, for example, some of the universities. And, they're wondering what this is all about as well. So do you feel, along with, we're going to discuss PRISM and some of the other things going on as well, but do you feel that this is perhaps, because I wondered that as well, why did he choose the Guardian and why did he choose the Post? That just seemed to be one of those things where whistleblowers would kind of know already that it's really not worth your time and effort to go to the mainstream media because they really aren't, well known to be so cooperative with that. So do you have any alternative feelings on this, that this may be just, another kind of distraction, look over here, well, this is going over here kind of thing? Do you think this is being blown out of proportion in mainstream media simply because of, being used as a distraction?
Yeah, what I think is being blown out, all this nonsense coming out now about him being a potential Chinese spy, that we had some people from the intelligence community today indicate that he took a thumb drive out of some classified working space in Hawaii with all these documents, thousands of documents. We heard the same thing about Bradley Manning putting all these, 250,000 State Department cables on a Lady Gaga CD. Having had some experience working in what's known as a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, there is no way you can put a thumb drive on these computer terminals. For that very reason, if they allowed USB ports, these classified terminals, they would have many, many more compromises of classified information. Same thing with CD-ROMs, whether it's a Lady Gaga CD or any other CD. You do not have the capability to introduce this type of portable recording media on these very secure systems. So all these stories are fake by the government. But the government knows that most people in the United States never worked in one of these facilities and have no idea, and they can run all this propaganda about thumb drives and CDs, compact discs, and DVDs, and all this other stuff, and people say, well, those computers inside NSA must be like my home computer on my desk. No, they're not. They're essentially, they're very, very different. And so why did he pick Hong Kong? I was a little surprised, but people were suggesting that Hong Kong is controlled by, I heard people say Red China. You talk about, every Cold War kook is coming out of the woodwork now. Unfortunately, they seem to be on Fox News and to some extent on CNN. But, I've been to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an international city. Yes, it used to be part of the UK until 1997, but they have a 50-year pact of basically giving them a special autonomy from the People's Republic of China, and having spoken to senior Chinese officials, including Chinese intelligence officials, I can tell you they know to keep their hands off of Hong Kong and Macau, which is the former Portuguese colony. They do recognize the fact that these are special autonomous regions, and if they made any overt move in Hong Kong, that would send a shudder through the financial community of Hong Kong, because people are investing in Hong Kong and doing business in Hong Kong because it's independent. So these people were saying, oh, he went to Hong Kong because, like he defected to East Berlin during the Cold War. These are people who probably, their only experience with China is probably going to a Chinese restaurant.
Well, I like your comment there about the computer systems and how people, general population, the masses can just, open up any article that's been tweaked or edited by any government agency and, really fall for whatever is told to them. USA Today released an interesting article about how Hong Kong wants answers on his hacking claims. And what I found interesting in the article was that Chinese University may have been of interest to the NSA beyond its infrastructure, because the researchers there are engaged in research projects with government counterparts in mainland China and elsewhere. So they cited an example of Dragon program, which is a joint project of the National Remote Sensing Center of China and the European Space Agency for Earth Observation Research and Application Development. So the technical fields of this particular company have been extended from remote sensing and geographic information system to the domain of Earth observation and navigation technology, which includes the remote sensing, the geographic information systems, satellite navigation, and deep space exploration. So that kind of stuck out to me for, several reasons. Basically because let's face it, the United States wants to know what everybody else is doing for technology. So that kind of information that he released to, I guess, his one and only paper interview in Hong Kong, from what I can tell from researching him here, he lets Hong Kong know that they're looking into these specific items. So for somebody who's worked in the agency and been exposed to the documents and things of that sort, he would know that information. Or, it's so hard to tell, are we being led by the carrot in front of the face to believe this and go here in these different, it gets very shadowy and it's hard to navigate. Your experience with the NSA when you worked there, did you leave the agency and become a whistleblower yourself? How was your experience working with them?
Yeah. I was working on Navy computer security programs, and NSA, their computer security program at the time was in its infancy. Believe it or not, the Navy was further, and the Air Force were further ahead than the National Security Agency in the area of applied computer security. Now, NSA had a lot of theoretical stuff going on with the mathematicians and the cryptographers, but I got out of the Navy. I left the Navy, and therefore I also left NSA. Now, NSA offered me a civilian job, but I having worked there, I said, no, I don't. This is not my lifestyle. I do not want to be part of this type of organization. It's just that you're so constrained. And travel, you have to, get permission basically to do anything. And this was in the mid-'80s, which makes me wonder, too, about what was going on. We know that Snowden sold his house in Hawaii, and then he went off to Hong Kong, and if that were Fort Meade, NSA headquarters, there would have been alarms triggered with that move, and he might not have gotten that far before being approached by some security people. And so I was a little bit surprised that he was doing all these lifestyle changes, and that's what they look for with their employees in NSA. But as some people have told me that at the NSA outstations, for example, like at Hawaii, that the security is not as strict as it is there as it is back in Fort Meade.
Well, that raises some questions, I believe, and people listening to this will go, well, there have been some stories leaked out through the alternative media where they do talk about the fact that he's, been kind of put in here, that this, again, go back to the distraction thing where, he's just been kind of put into this position to be another WikiLeaks kind of figure. We need an enemy. United States government needs an enemy to continue to run their programs, to continue to pass budgets, to continue to do what they want to do. People are tired of the war on terror. I really believe that. I think you have a certain section of the population who really falls into that, let's go get them, we're doing the right thing. But then there's another bigger population that's growing and growing. They're tired of the economic drain. They're tired of this kind of elusive enemy on the other side of the ocean that we keep hauling money and going into. The story just seems to be kind of falling apart for a lot of Americans, a lot of people, and in other countries too. So we have this kind of, willowy thing falling apart, and then all of a sudden, we need to kind of, organize energy and people's focus and whatever you want to call it into something, funnel it into this, and it just feels like this is awfully convenient for something of that sort. I think there are people who stand up and cheer that, saying he's doing the right thing, just like with the WikiLeaks. We had the same kind of, go team kind of opposition, putting the people who wanted the person to come out and continue to do it against the people who thought that this was an atrocity. So, it just seems to be creating the duality between the Americans and people, but also, asking a good question. I mean, when you expose programs such as PRISM, and you talk about people's information being gathered, phone calls being listened to, I just assumed years ago that was always happening. I would just say, well, whatever. I have nothing to hide. If they want to listen, hey, how you doing, kind of thing. What difference does it make, really, in that sense? But in another sense, you have an interesting expose happening where people are starting to put together these dots, and they're starting to become smarter because of the connectivity that we have based on the technology that's been created. Facebook, social media, you have all of, internet instantly illuminates the global planet based on, you can contact somebody across the world within seconds. So, when we talk about programs like PRISM, can you talk a little bit about how that program works, what you know about it, what we're really looking at, how this information, quote, leaks out to the public, and what maybe the agenda really is with understanding the connectivity aspects?
Well, I guess I'm one of the few around. I'm feeling my age. I can go back in my time machine to the 1980s, and I know back in the 1980s what the senior people at NSA wanted, because I sat in those planning meetings, and they were talking about, in those days, now this is as only the internet was coming in. We didn't have the World Wide Web. There was the Internet, or ARPANET as it was once known, the DoD network that expanded to universities and colleges and research centers. But they talked about, we want total hearability. And in those days, NSA was listening to phone calls, any type of communication in the radio spectrum. So they talked in terms of, we want total hearability. Hearability, I remember that. It was stuck in my mind. My God, they want to hear everything. They said it, and that was their plan. Now, when the Internet started to gain popularity with people using email, in 1991, there was an NSA project called Nutcracker, which was really this metadata. Even then, they were talking about collecting everything coming over the Internet. So, fast forward this to the present time. Oh, I should say that I was with a public advocacy group in the early in 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001, and Admiral John Poindexter of the Iran-Contra infamy came back into the Bush administration and was working for the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency on a system called the Total Information Awareness System. And you look at the logo, we all joked about it was a pyramid with the eye on top, the thing that you find on the back of the dollar bill, looking down at the earth. And they made no bones about what they wanted. They wanted access to everything. And there was Congress that my organization, the organization I was with, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, we sued under the Freedom of Information Act to get the documents on that, and they finally, we took it to court, and Judge John Bates of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia ruled against the Pentagon and said, you got to release that information. Well, that said a lot of things, and, this was like, they want everything. They want access to all the databases, and Congress cut the funding. But we heard at the time that it's okay, you cut the funding to the Pentagon, but it's going to reappear over at the NSA. It did, and now we know that as PRISM. NSA's got this huge data center that's going to open up in September in Utah, 17 football fields in area. It's going to be able to process a number that most people would not find fathomable. It's called a yottabyte of data. That's one with countless zeros after it. That's they say so the NSA and General Keith Alexander, the director, who's also wears the hat as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, say we are not interested in everything, but they're collecting everything. So if they're not interested in it, why are they collecting everything? And
well, that's a good question. I want to interrupt you right there for 1 second because that's a good question. If they're not, if they say they're not interested, Obama goes on TV and says, we don't want to listen to your phone calls, but yet they do, right?
Yeah, and the reason why is Google and Yahoo and all these other companies, Microsoft, all said they were under pressure to store this information for the government to come and give them an order. They said, no, it's a bottom line issue, right? To store that information, we got to build data centers. We got to store it. It costs us money. Affects our bottom line. So what NSA did was come along and say, well, we'll store it for you. Well, it's like, would anyone who's going away for a month go to the police station and give them their key and say, look, just in case something happens, we want you guys to have the key? And you come back and you find out there's nothing left in your house.
Help yourself. Help yourself to whatever I have.
Because the police say, that's nice, Mr. Policeman. I still believe in that when I was 7 years old. And my mother said, you go to the police. I know better. The police are not the people you want to go to in all cases. So, yeah, trust the government. I think it's just a ridiculous notion. But the thing about Snowden under attack, Snowden getting attacked, everything about, he dumped his girlfriend and he couldn't complete college and he had all these jobs. Well, one place he worked was the U.S. mission to the UN in Geneva. And I looked at his job there. The Swiss government has confirmed he was a attaché. So he was under official cover by the State Department this few years ago and in Geneva, and that set off an alarm with me because I have no reason to say that the Swiss government's wrong because they have the diplomatic list. We have to declare those diplomats. So if they have that information, that means Mr. Snowden was probably working with the CIA and NSA with an agency that's even more secretive than both agencies. It's called the Special Collections Service. It's headquartered in an office building in Beltsville, Maryland, between Beltsville and Laurel, right off of Interstate 95. it's connected physically by cable to the State Department's telecommunications system, which provides satellite communication with all the embassies around the world. So what happens is NSA runs collection units in U.S. and British, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand embassies. That would explain Mr. Snowden's kind of spotty resume, because he said he was working covertly. He was operating undercover, and probably with false identities, false affiliations and whatnot. So that would explain that. And if he worked for the Special Collections Service and he's sitting in Hong Kong right now, he is the most sensitive person to come forward in a long, long time. And I can just see that President Obama and others really want to get their hands on this guy. I'm not saying he's an agent or he's a defector to China. It's just that he knows an awful lot of other things about breaking and entering, because this is what Special Collection Service does. Internally in NSA, it's known as F6, and most people have never heard about it. They want to keep it that way. So if Snowden's singing like a canary, I would imagine there's people very, very worried about what information he has.
Well, it certainly seems that way with the massive response to him and the almost overpowering character assassination that they're trying to at least do on the mainstream media. It's almost like they're kind of starting to go that way without really, full force, because I think that will come eventually. I think what's happening now is they're kind of it's a soft sell to the American people because if they initially came out and it was just hardcore character assassination, then of course people would be like, well, wait a minute, you're not. Why are you just assuming that he's this, this, and this? And people, because people, like I said, people are waking up and they're starting to finally come around and understand how these things work, even if it's just slight, because what you just exposed was pretty, important for people to understand that we have these agencies like the Special Collection Service in Maryland happening, above the CIA, correct? Basically these organizations are above that, yes? So, you have
organization.
Yeah, and then since 9/11, Wayne, I mean, have you watched, being that you've had such a long exposure into these, and you can come out and you can talk about this, what are your feelings with the Patriot Act, and how everything is a matter of national security, and the stamp of classified goes on basically everything, and they're not supposed to talk about anything, and anything that goes through the court system can just be gagged, and it's just amazing how that happens. But how has times changed since 9/11 from your perspective? What have you watched manifest and transform since those days?
Well, we became a surveillance state. It's the things we were worried about in the 90s when I was a privacy advocate in Washington. We argued all the time with the Clinton administration, who wanted, the Justice Department, Attorney General Reno, and her deputy, who was Eric Holder, by the way, wanted all these powers, and we fought them tooth and nail. And everything that's in the Patriot Act was basically their wish list in the 90s. We sat there and they said, well, in a perfect world, this is what we would like. We said, you're never going to get that. And they did. After 9/11, they got that plus more. And so everything we were, and we were like, amongst the privacy advocates, we were talking about this dystopian future. There were these movies out, Enemy of the State, and then the Gattaca. And we would say, if we do our job, that's how this country, that's what's going to happen in this country. And of course, movies aside, after 9/11, we did become like that. And it's not getting any better. And Obama, I supported Barack Obama in 2008. He wasn't my first choice, but, after 8 years of Bush and Cheney, I figured we actually needed to change, and I believed him. But after seeing him in action, just in a couple of months, I said, "There's something wrong here. He's not governing any differently, really, than Bush and Cheney." And I started looking at his background, found out after he graduated from Columbia back in the early '80s, he went to work for Business International Corporation, which was a well-known CIA front activity. Here again, we have a person in the presidency who is more beholden to the intelligence super state than he is to the people who elected him.
I think people are starting to realize that. What was your experience when you first started talking against the agencies you worked for so long?
Well, yeah, when I left NSA and worked as a contractor various places for a while, and then when I got involved with the privacy work, that was in the 90s. I used to get together with these NSA people, and of course they didn't like what I was talking about, but we agreed to disagree. I didn't trust some of them as far as I could throw them. I did get in some spirited debates in public with some of them in Washington, but it wasn't, where you have to worry about what some people have been reporting that, there's been some intelligence people that would like to kill Snowden and kill Glenn Greenwald. I've heard this too. I heard this in Washington in the last, since 9/11. I've heard these types of threats. Somebody ought to take these reporters out. This comes out of NSA security, and we didn't have that back in the 90s. But after 9/11, it's like they just people became like fascist, and they thought and they're not joking around. They shouldn't be working in security, going around even with the thought of going out and killing somebody. But we now have heard this. Even Bob Woodward, the old Washington Post, he expressed some fear that he said something critical of the Obama White House, and he said he received a threat. He didn't say what kind of threat, but it sounded ominous. And I do know that the White House does this. They do threaten people, and so do their intelligence agencies. That's just, we have a president who drones American citizens without a trial. I guess we can expect anything out of this
That's
administration.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when we talk about the change in our society, our Western United States society culture after 9/11, we're really looking at a transformed culture that has become very questionable in its intentions and agendas. But I also think that it has done a wonderful job of affecting people's minds to the point where they don't even want to talk about the subject. They don't want to tweet about it or post about it on Facebook or talk about it to their office coworkers or really get into it with people because they're afraid. And the fear-mongering, the level of psychological fear-mongering that happens because of cases like this, because people are exposed to this through mainstream media, and because they only believe that and never question or look for any other kinds of sources or just don't have the time to research it for whatever reason. We're looking at almost like a brainwashing agenda of being able to psychologically affect people. I'm going to order your book, The Manufacturing of a President. I can't wait to read it. I think that's going to be an interesting read. And after I'm done reading it, if you'd like to come back on for another hour to discuss it,
sure.
I'd love to have you back. So one thing I'm curious about too, Wayne, is your experience going on to mainstream media to discuss these kinds of topics with people. With you kind of go into the belly of the beast itself. What has been your experience with the mainstream media when you go on to talk about these kinds of things?
Basically the punching bag for people like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly because they needed to have some quote-unquote liberal on there to beat up. But the thing is, I know these guys, and they are showmen. They are not journalists. Fox News is an entertainment channel masquerading as a news network, and one can say that they're all like that. Certainly, there's some. I think CNN, Anderson Cooper is really more of an entertainer. He had a show on during the day where was no different than the Jerry Springer show. So these are not real journalists. People in the business, and I say, and I'm falling into their trap, people in journalism, not in the business, because they're in the business. That's show business. That's that Hollywood term. They're in the business. They know that these people are not legitimate journalists. As long as people know that going in, that they want ratings, they're entertainers, you just kind of keep it. They want to fight. I gave them a fight. I gave them a spirited fight. It's just yelling at each other, and as long as you don't go in there thinking, well, I'm really going to try to sell my idea, because I know the audience will, if I convince the audience, well, no, that audience you're never going to convince. So you just go in there and do your thing, and it's like getting in the boxing ring for a little bit and then getting back out. And hopefully you're not bloody too much. Mm-hmm. But I really think that this is. I knew professional journalists, television, radio people, and we all say the same thing. Those who are still with us, many my old colleagues have passed away. But it's the same thing. We just shake our heads and lament over what has happened to television and to some extent radio news or radio journalism. It's awful, because there's no one left like Walter Cronkite or Chet Huntley or even later on some of the CNN people who were on in the 80s and the 90s. Very few of them are left on the air.
Well, I'm appreciating your appearance here on Alternative Radio, because nobody owns my website, nobody owns my radio show, and people that work here at Achieve Radio do their best to let us hosts really take control of what we do as far as the show goes. So I can say you are always welcome here, and you can always offer your opinion without the ridicule that you get on mainstream media. Now, your website, WayneMadsenReport.com, is that where people can find you, more information about you?
Yes, there's two sides. There's the public side, and then there's the subscription side. That's just to allow me to keep it going. But basically what I did when I started the website in 2005, one of the resources at Washington lost many years ago, which I think was sorely needed, and I was told by others it was, we need something like this, was there was a journalist named Jack Anderson who had a column called the Washington Merry-Go-Round, and before him it was Drew Pearson. These were called muckraking journalists, and muckraking is not a pejorative. It's like you dig at the bottom of the barrel and you see what comes out, and usually it's scandals. I thought that was sorely needed in a city where it's all the journalism's puffery. It's the White House press corps is really the stenographer's corps. The information, all they do is rewrite faxes and press releases from government officials. That's not journalism. When you see somebody with the press corps like Helen Thomas, who says, hey, I'm going to stand up and say something, what happened to her? They fired her. But that's what I'm trying to do on the Internet, is to bring back the spirit of the muckraking journalists. And I've been able to break a few stories over the years. There's a State Department scandal now with a foreign ambassador of Belgium, being cited for being a pedophile. I broke the pedophile story in 2007 in State Department and named an ambassador. Not this guy, but somebody else. So usually when I write something, I have to wait 5 or 6 years to see it on the front page of the Washington Post.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, I get saddened to hear that, because people really need to understand what true journalism is and how investigative journalism can be one of the most helpful things of revealing truth and getting truth out there and understanding how we work. When my kids go to school and they learn history and they go through government and they come home and they're doing the homework, I look at what they're doing and I go, what? That has nothing to do with how it really works.
Yeah.
So we're taught,
You're right.
We're taught at such an early age that this is government, right. This is how it works, and it's all BS.
Right, and I got to say that that it's all education. I got to really thank my teachers in public school for teaching critical thinking, and I know it's not being taught now. The corporations don't want critical thinking taught because they want a subservient group of consumers out there. But I remember in 6th grade and 7th and 8th and 9th grade, I was sitting in class, and I had teachers who were critical of the Vietnam War, critical of President Johnson, critical of President Nixon, and really these teachers, and the most critical ones weren't where you would expect to find them in a history class. In my case, they were my math teachers and my science teachers, but everybody taught the students to be critical thinkers, and that's just not happening today. And I shudder to think what these schools are turning out, as far as people who don't question authority.
Well, I can tell you, my son does, he's in high school, and he comes back and he looks at what I'm talking about on my radio shows, and so it does definitely jar him a little bit, because then he goes back to his classmates and says, well, my mom says this, and it becomes quite a debate.
Right.
But getting back to you and to how you've been working within this, arena really for so many years, and you've had such first-hand experience and insight into these agencies themselves and how they work. It would be surprising, I think, to some of my listeners that you're able to come on here and to talk about these subjects and topics the way you do, and to reveal that. Is there things you cannot talk about, to sources like, to platforms like myself or to other radio shows, TV shows? No? So you're completely clear to talk about anything?
Yeah. When I worked at NSA, it was in the mid '80s. We had the Soviet Union at the time. We had the Warsaw Pact. We had a China that was considered a military opponent of the United States. Well, things sort of at the end of the '80s changed. So anything I knew back then has really been superseded by historical events. We no longer have free Soviet nuclear submarines sitting in the Atlantic Ocean with a 15-minute window to fire their missiles and obliterate New York, Washington, and a few other cities.
Now they have satellites that can do that. Well, okay, so yeah. you're free to be a free critical thinker, and you're able to go around and to talk and to do your website and come on shows and talk about these things. So when you look at a story like we've been discussing for the past 45 minutes or so here of Edward Snowden, and you go through it and you watch it, now does that part of you that's been involved with this, obviously because you did speak on this, start to notice the red flags that pop up, and you kind of are able to go into these stories to be able to piece them together so that you can say, okay, yes, this is a legitimate thing, or no, something's really stinky here and this doesn't kind of cut right with me?
Yeah. Snowden, I know he's getting this huge character assassination taking place. I've dealt with other whistleblowers like him. Actually, I was involved in a whistleblowing case in the Navy, and I was attacked under, not so publicly, but within the chain of command I was attacked. And this is what they do. This is the type of thing that happens to people who, they say violate the chain of command or, go public. The red flags are really that are popping up for me are the means that the government is using to try to destroy his credibility, from these sock puppets on the internet posting these repetitious attacks to people attacking his girlfriend because she was an acrobat. They're saying because she did pole dancing, she must have been a stripper. I mean, see, this gets into the debasing of him. And then there's a photograph of him, like, wearing his pants around, I mean, this is from 10 years ago. So they're going to find everything they can on this guy. I know what he's in store for. But I think from the interview they gave The Guardian, he knew what he was in for, too. Because obviously he knows about other whistleblowers like Tom Drake. Many more senior people in NSA have blown the whistle. There was Tom Drake that basically said, the same thing as Mr. Snowden, Ed Snowden, and there were retirees who had served in the NSA when I was there who came forward and talked about the abuses. There was William Binney and Kurt Wiebe and Mr. Loomis and Russ Tice and these people, Tom Tam, who was a Justice Department prosecutor, and they all got harassed by the FBI and NSA security for coming forward. So it doesn't surprise me that he did. What surprises me is I think he has much more information than any of those other guys had, because I think he has working knowledge of targeted individuals by name and targeted offices and homes. If he, in fact, as I suspect, he worked for the Special Collection Service, because that's what they do. So we may be in store for a lot more revelations, which I think will also increase the efforts to try to get him extradited from Hong Kong.
Oh, yeah, I agree. So we're dealing with somebody here who seems to be authentic, has this training, has these really extravagant connections to various places. And so they really want him. They want him for probably a variety of reasons, like you've stated. And then we're dealing with somebody who also knows the game, knows how to work it because he has seen it. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. And joining me next week on the air, just to let all your listeners know, I have John Stratton coming on. He's going to be talking about updates on this case. I'm doing a two-part kind of show here. One show this week with Wayne, and next week with John, we're going to be talking about updates, because this kind of event happens real time, and there's so much that changes day to day. It's almost like watching, any other event that happens that's important. So it's going to be fascinating to me as I watch this for the next 7 days to see how it transforms or kind of expands into different places. So I will have another national security expert on the air next week who will be talking about the updates. I'm going to continue with Wayne's show and the things that we've talked about here, and continue on with the conversation with John to see how he feels about it. And really what my hope is here by doing this kind of show is to share with people, all of you listening, the abstract nature of these kinds of events. You cannot just turn the internet on and take it word for word as truth. You have to really know what you're talking about. And I believe that one of the best ways to really do that is to talk to people like Wayne, like John, who have this experience with these agencies and know how they operate and can find the red flags within the stories coming out, and who actively watch them to see what's going on. And we need to hear their stories. We need to hear their thoughts and their commentary on stories like this, because you are not going to get it from the mainstream media. You just simply are not. So the things that go on, this is truth. This is part of, changing the world that we live in. This is part of having, the ability to come back around and say, okay, these things are happening. What do we do about them now? Wayne, don't you think that so many people at this point perhaps feel hopeless or powerless to be able to change this?
Well, certainly after 9/11, when they talked about the new normal, I always hated that term, because they were saying, well, this is the way it's going to be and there's nothing you can do about it, so get used to it. But, looking at the members of Congress just basically roll over and, accept everything NSA's telling them, or the Obama administration's telling them that we need these powers. We were able to stop a half dozen terrorist attacks when, in fact, they gave no examples. They gave no detail. They gave a few details and a few examples, but those attacks were probably stopped not because they were listening to everybody's phone calls, but because of good old-fashioned shoe leather on the ground, human intelligence. And, you just wonder, who are these members of Congress really beholden to? And it's both parties. I mean, it's Democrats and Republicans, and I think the only answer is, this two-party duopoly of power we have. And this is easier said than done, and we've got to get rid of it. I mean, I remember we were talking about it in the 90s. Well, we need a constitutional convention, just change our form of government. And, people said, well, we just have to make our current constitution work. And, then we found out that Bush called it a expletive piece of paper, and there's a radio interview that Mr. Obama gave in Chicago in 2001 where he called the U.S. Constitution a charter of negative rights. I don't know what that means, but I've never heard any president refer to the Constitution as a charter of negative rights.
The Charter of Negative Rights?
Negative rights. What he was trying to say was the Constitution says, here's all the things the government is prevented from doing, but it doesn't say what the government is allowed to do. Like he would favor that. I mean, tapping everybody's telephone and reading everybody's email. This is what he's driving at. This is pretty scary because he said he was a professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago. Actually, he wasn't a full-time. He was one of these visiting people, so it's debatable how often he taught a class. It's very hard to find any student that actually took his class. It was around today to tell us what in the world was he teaching. Well, if he was teaching that, that's highly suspicious as far as what he thinks about the U.S. Constitution. I would welcome it. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I think I know enough about the Constitution. I'd be very comfortable in debating President Obama on that issue, that a charter of negative rights.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I hope all of you listening are writing that down. Charter of Negative Rights, directly quoted from President Obama himself. We have a question submitted on the Inquick here on Achieve from Joseph in Napa, California. He's asking you, Wayne. He said he'd like to know what your thoughts are on Matt Drudge. He appears on the surface to be a muckraker, but with a postmodern flair for the overdramatic, but I question his veracity. We only have a couple minutes left. Do you have any comments on Matt? Are you familiar with it?
He's very political. He's very pro. He's a Republican, and he puts out a lot of Republican talking points. Unlike, I'm not tied to either party. I find them both disgusting, and I also find some of the third parties, they don't seem to be able to get off the ground, and they're like narcissistic because they're centered around particular candidates. I don't want to mention any names. And we know, the Reform Party, the Green Party, it was all candidate-based, personality-based. To do a muckraking, everybody's got to be fair game.
Yeah.
And Drudge goes after Democrats, but he rarely goes after Republicans. So to me, that's not true.
I think we're moving beyond this whole, Republican Democratic thing. I think people are really starting to realize that it doesn't matter anymore. What we're dealing with is so beyond the duality that appears in this illusionist kind of, setup where you're told that it works this way, but it doesn't work this way. And people really want to stick to their beliefs. They don't like to come out of their comfort zone. So when you question their belief systems and comfort zones, you immediately get defense, and so we're kind of knocking on the edge of egos here and really asking people to kind of say, hey, this isn't really what it's about. We need to move beyond that. But people don't really know how to transform this. So it'll be interesting to see, how this evolves and what happens. We are pretty much out of time, so we have a couple minutes left here, but I'd like you to just kind of give some closing thoughts on where you think, we really need to focus our positive energy at this point.
I have nothing to hide. Why should I worry about anything? And you hear it a lot on TV. I don't have anything to hide from the government. And people give up. People say I give up my information to Facebook, and I give up my information to Match.com, and all these websites. The difference is they don't have the power to arrest you, to bring charges against you, to impanel a secret grand jury. These companies don't do that, but the government does. That is the major difference between people giving up their information to these .com operations and wanting to give it up en masse to the federal government.
There it is. Wayne Madsen, thank you so much for being here, for giving me an hour of your time. I've enjoyed speaking with you greatly. Everybody who's been listening, the archive will be available immediately after we're done airing. You can share it. My archives are free. They will always be free. And keep asking for the truth. Until next time, everyone, namaste. And next week we continue this conversation. Good night, everybody.